original Heathrow, one terminal made of tents. Today we'll be looking at how the airport celebrated its anniversary, and as airports are nothing without passengers, how travelling's changed over the last 50 years for people who've passed through its terminals. Now, Heathrow's story is one of a changing world where flying has become commonplace and travelling to far-flung cities no longer a distant dream. For a few minutes this afternoon, normal operations will be put on hold for a unique fly-past of aircraft which is due to pass overhead. Julian Tutt will be looking at the aircraft for us.
Well, conditions aren't bad, just the odd heavy shower around for this rare moment in aviation that's been organised by the RAF Benevolent Fund. We'll be seeing over 30 aircraft from the de Havilland Rapide to the Boeing 777 via the Red Arrows and Concorde. 50 years of aviation history compressed into a quarter of an hour. The M25 shows up clearly on Thames radar, which tracks the approaching formation on its route over the City of London and along the Thames. From its departure airfield, 15 miles away at Stansted in Essex, where Raymond Baxter, who's been flying in and out of Heathrow for 50 years, is watching.
And who, 50 years ago, would have imagined that superb modern building, Stansted's new passenger terminal, springing up in the heart of the Essex countryside? Since yesterday, we here have been enjoying a sort of time warp experience watching the runway as the aircraft of yesteryear have mingled with the routine traffic of today. A truly amazing collection of contrasting civil aircraft and a sight probably never to be seen again in one place, so savor every second of it. The performance ranging from 150 miles an hour to twice the speed of sound. Engine output from 250 horsepower to 47,000 pounds of thrust, and range from across the Channel and back to 5,000 miles non-stop. A unique celebration of a proud anniversary and a staggering illustration of the rate of progress in a mere 50 years. And here's an old-timer which brings back many happy memories, the dear old Bristol freighter. Back in the 50s, it operated the first car-carrying air ferry across the Channel. A firm called Silver Cities ran them from Lydd to Le Touquet. And even when our children were quite small, my wife and I would pack them into the car with all the kit, rush down to catch the aeroplane, and then drive on down to the Alps or the Mediterranean or wherever the sun was shining. Great days. But in fact, the old freighter only just made this great day. Captain John Duncan is the man who leads the team that got her here. A bit of a close call, John.
Yes, indeed, Raymond. Yes, the team worked very well. We managed an air test last night at 10 o'clock. There were a few things came out of that, and so they were working through till about 3 o'clock this morning, and here we are.
I noticed she was smoking rather nicely as she came in. Standard practice on these engines?
Yes, I was rather hoping you hadn't noticed that, but yes, it is. It's fairly common to get a little bit of smoke at idle, yeah.
Congratulations to all of your team.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Well, back here at the top of the control tower, you can see we've got a fantastic view of the airport behind, arguably one of the best seats in the house. Now, today this is something of a concrete metropolis, but of course it wasn't always like this. This flat land behind me here was formed 25 million years ago. But even when this first became an airfield, it was still surrounded by market gardens. But then Heathrow's had many different faces over the ages.
250 years ago, the ancient village of Heathrow overlooked Hounslow Heath, a happy hunting ground for highwaymen. Legend has it that Dick Turpin sheltered in the Green Man Inn at Hatton, from where coach passengers on the Bath Road will be told to stand and deliver. By the First World War, the Heath had become a training aerodrome for the Royal Flying Corps. Sopwith camels bounced around on grass strips. In 1929, Richard Fairey bought 150 acres, and gradually the Great West Aerodrome took shape. Here, in the largest hangar of its type in the world at the time, the Fairey Firefly and Swordfish, the old string bag, were born. But the first big development started towards the end of the war. The standard RAF triangular pattern of runways was built, each 100 yards wide, to take the heavy transport aircraft needed for the war in the Far East. In 1947, plans were drawn up for a massive expansion at Heathrow, by now London's main civil airport. There were to be 3 sets of parallel runways, 9 in all, with 3 to the north of the Bath Road. That never happened, but the new central area of terminals did, linked by tunnels under the northern runway to the outside world. By 1955, much of Hatton had given way to huge new hangars. Heathrow today has just 2 main east-west runways, considerably lengthened, with a third little-used one. Terminal 4 is to the south, and to the west, the sewage works at Perry Oaks, the planned site of Terminal 5. Heathrow now covers nearly 3,000 acres, with highway robbery no longer a threat. More international passengers pass through the 4 terminals here than any other airport in the world, with up to 1,300 aircraft movements a day. Around 90 airlines fly from Heathrow, but it wasn't always so.
They call it Heathrow locally. It was in April 1944 that history came to these country fields. An airport was required to finish off the Japanese. An immediate need with an eye to the peaceful future. That was the beginning.
In 1946, with 1 runway complete, the airport was handed over to civilian control.
This proving flight starts off from Heathrow, which will be the future civil airport of London.
The first plane to take off from Heathrow was a Lancastrian. The first terminal building was made from canvas and duckboards, but there were few complaints.
I think so many people had never flown by air before, and they were, and let's face it, rationing was still on. I think it just accepted that the English way of muddling through, you could interpret all this as.
A new decade, a new monarch, and with it a renewed sense of optimism. Britain was rebuilding, and Heathrow was no exception. For its time, it was a revolutionary design, a tunnel built under the runway which connected the outside world to a smart, new, purpose-built terminal. Heathrow quickly became a fashionable watering hole, a place to see and be seen.
We wanted to be there where the action was and be seen to be there where the action was. It was just a very, very glamorous place to be. And the afternoons were rounded off with high tea in the Vanguard restaurant, which was run by 14. It was a very, very grand affair.
Then came the swinging 60s. Heathrow became the stopping-off point for the rich and famous. But it wasn't just celebrities who used Heathrow. The 1960s heralded the age of mass travel. 2 new terminals were opened to accommodate the growth. It was another Royal Heathrow occasion.
For many months, London Airport has been preparing for the day when the doors of the first jumbo jet opens, and out come the equivalent of 10 double-decker busloads of people, plus all their luggage. London Airport is geared for the flying revolution, which will enable more people than ever before to take to the air and visit those faraway places.
The new big jets brought a huge upsurge in long-distance travel. Heathrow was bursting, and Terminal 4 was opened in 1986. The Spartan design of the check-in area was deliberate to discourage long farewells. But once airside, shopping arcades were built to rival Knightsbridge. 54 million passengers a year now pass through Heathrow on their way to 220 destinations around the world. 26,000 cups of tea and coffee are served daily. 6,500 sandwiches are eaten.
Pack up, let's fly away.
All beyond the wildest dreams of Heathrow's aviation pioneers. And did you know we buy a staggering 1 million gallons of wines and spirits from those duty-free shops every single year? Now, obviously, Heathrow is nothing without passengers, and it can certainly boast a lot of those. A few days ago, I took a little trip round Terminal 3, and I bumped into quite a few people who remembered Heathrow as it once was.
Well, of course, in 1949, Heathrow was quite a small airport, and there were propeller-driven airplanes. I think we only had one terminal then, and it was easy. Then it got very complicated. Lots of terminals, very hard to get from one terminal to the other. But now it's very well organized.
We used to bring our daughter, when she was a baby there, up here to see the plane. Then we went down to Plymouth. But each time we've come up to, you know, we've seen such a difference now. It's sort of, well, it's amazing, really, you know.
It's like comparing that as a postage stamp on a present-day full-size newspaper opened out.
Why do you love flying so much?
It gives you another, you know, you think of another world entirely. That you are in another world entirely, that God is so great. How did he make this kind of a thing happen? You know what I'm saying? Like the plane and everything, it's beautiful. I love it. I love flying.
I guess you'd have to say that it was an awfully nice little airport then, and now it's an awfully nice, very big airport.
While life goes on here at Stansted, the stars of the show await their cue for the fly past. Here, for example, the de Havilland Rapide, which first flew in 1934. An extremely elegant little fabric-covered biplane and a charming reminder of the days when air travel was a luxury for the well-to-do individual. Compare that with the rugged structure pioneered by the Americans, yet this, the Douglas DC-3 Dakota, first flew only 1 year later in 1935 and is still earning its commercial living. This one was built in 1943 and is owned and operated by Captain Andrew Dixon and his wife Geraldine. He flies it, she takes care of the nosh. The DC-3's successor, the DC-4, which entered commercial service in the United States in the mid-1940s. This one, operated by South African Airlines, is on a world tour from Cape Town, and it too is still earning its keep.
We started off on the 22nd of April with a flying safari through Africa, taking in destinations such as Victoria Falls, Lake Kariba, Kilimanjaro and Luxor in Egypt, on the way to Düsseldorf, where we dropped our first group of passengers off. From there, we left with the second group of passengers on a 2-week air cruise through Scandinavia, all the way up to Noordkap, which is the northernmost point of the European continent at 71.5 degrees north. And yesterday, we dropped our passengers off in Helsinki, especially to be able to participate in the flypast at Heathrow today.
And here, last amongst the world's first, the de Havilland Comet 4C jet airliner Canopus. And because it was the world's first jet airliner, the Comet automatically produced the world's first licensed jet airliner captain, John Cat's Eyes Cunningham, so called because he was a brilliant night fighter pilot during the war. And later, as chief test pilot at de Havilland's, he flew the maiden flight of the Comet, and then with Hawker Siddeley, the Trident, as well as many other major achievements. Canopus is now operated by the Royal Air Force Experimental Establishment at Boscombe Down.
It's delightful. Obviously, it's one of the oldest airplanes we've got. It's frankly a little bit of a handful compared to the modern airliners, but absolute delight to fly, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to fly an airplane of this vintage, frankly. It is the last Comet, it's the last Comet in the world, in fact, to be flying. never was an airliner, but it's obviously a Comet Mark 4C airliner derivative. We use it as a lab aeroplane, so it's wall-to-wall crates, iron crates and wires and pieces of electrical equipment. In fact, we just returned from the North Pole where we've been checking out some kit in the North Pole, namely global positioning systems and inertial navigation systems. It still fulfills the role, and it has only gone 8,000 hours, which is very few hours compared to an airliner. So in reality, it's still a young aeroplane in airframe hours, bought and paid for, and everybody loves it.
Around 150,000 people pass through Heathrow's 4 terminals every day. Checking in is all done by computer nowadays, but 50 years ago, it would have been a very different story. Then only the rich could afford to fly, but even so, conditions were very primitive. A tent like this would have been Heathrow's one and only terminal building. Everything would have happened under canvas: passports, customs, check-in, departure. Because aircraft could only carry a handful of passengers, flying was a very intimate experience. Now, waiting outside would have been a converted Lancaster bomber. On board, air hostesses like Julie Knight, whose job was to make life as pleasant and as comfortable as possible for the passengers. Not an easy task, given the conditions inside.
They were very small, because they only carried 12 passengers. And all passengers had to have oxygen masks because the aircraft weren't pressurized, and you couldn't fly over 10,000 feet without having oxygen because you'd pass out.
All completely different from the luxury of flying today.
Everything's in front of you, as you can see now, and just by pressing this button, your screen just pops out and tush round. It has 50 different channels of films, and you've got the news from London every day. So you're always kept up to date, even from news to films.
We didn't have the videos and those sort of things, of course. We used to give them the magazine Penguin to read, and apart from that, we had to make the journey, which was a long journey, as fun as we could ourselves, and make them all feel they were one big family.
But not all passengers were willing to play happy families. One Noel Coward proved a little difficult.
Having come on a pressurised aeroplane as far as Nassau, he was rather peeved to find that he was now in a little aeroplane with no pressurisation, everything rather primitive. And he used to complain quite a bit, actually.
The first passenger jet, the Comet, was designed to make life a little more comfortable, but the hostesses still had their problems.
In those days, on the Comet, we didn't have trolleys at all. All drinks, meals, anything that the passenger required was all served from a tray. And the same with the drinks. All the drinks were served. We didn't have soda, little tins of soda water in those days. We all carried a soda siphon on our little fingers.
We had to wash up and wash up and wash up mountains of crockery before we landed. There were some places where you could offload the crockery for washing, but there were some places where we were told, don't do this on pain of death, because it's very expensive at this particular airport.
At the back of the Comet, it was so noisy, and we invented our own sort of sign language.
We still use
the tea
for a cup of
and
tea
the coffee.
and the little C.
That's right.
And the O for the orange
juice. That's right. Well, it all started, I'm sure, on Comets from the back of the aircraft. Did you have milk?
No, we didn't do that.
And water?
No, we didn't do that one either.
There were quite a lot. I can't remember all of them now.
Hostesses were felt by many to epitomise glamour, but the job was far from easy.
It was glamorous on the ground, but nobody could say it was glamorous in the air, because we had no pressurised cabins and our ankles swelled up and all the passengers were sick, and it was not a glamorous job up there. But on the ground, yes, because we had a lot of time off.
Heather Ashley was issued with a handbook on how to be glam.
It was called BEA, Be Elegant Always. And it told us about dress and deportment, how to sit properly, how to stand, keep your head up, always keep your knees and thighs together, sit with one foot slightly behind the other, and just be poised and elegant at all times.
So did all that enable them to meet their millionaires?
I've often read that all the girls married rich men, but I think I missed out somewhere. I married a pilot. They weren't all that rich.
And so now here at Stansted, the stars of the show prepare to take the stage. Although, of course, every aircraft in the flypast is a star in its own right. There go the two little Gypsy 6s on the Rapide, 200 horsepower apiece, 160 miles an hour cruising speed, call it 140 for comfort. What a contrast with the red arrows parked behind it. And here's the Comet, 4 Rolls-Royce Avon engines, and you'll notice how they are built into the wing in contrast to the American practice of hanging them in pods underneath. The de Havilland Comet, beloved of all its pilots because it was one of those very, very few civil airliners which could claim to be overpowered. Coming bang up to date, the Douglas DC-8. You see the point about the engines being in pods under the wing, and compare the size of those engines with the engines of the Comet, which were in their day the most powerful in the world. And just watch that rotation. And now, as they take off to form up for the flypast, one by one, we see the aircraft which mark the milestones of progress along the path of civil aviation.
Hello, London Tower. This is Charlie Fox Peter Baker Dog. Request landing instruction. Over.
After the war, it was the DC-3 which laid the foundation for airline services around the world, changing the face of civil aviation forever. The Lockheed Constellation also became a familiar sight at Heathrow, opening up transatlantic flights, if you could afford the £93 one-way ticket to New York. The Boeing Stratocruiser introduced a new level of passenger comfort with BOAC in the 50s. While the British-built Vickers-Viscount radically improved short and medium-haul travel. Its turboprop engines produced a far smoother ride than any piston-engined aircraft at the time. Britain also led the way in the jet age. Its superior engine technology had given airframe manufacturers like de Havilland a 10-year advantage over its rivals. The Comet, in service with BOAC in 1952, became the world's first jet airliner. But then disaster struck. Metal fatigue caused 3 aircraft to disintegrate in mid-air. The problems were resolved with the Comet 4, which remained in airline service around the world until 1980. But Britain had lost its advantage to the Boeing 707, a new economy fares, which made long-distance travel possible for millions more. Vickers-Armstrong countered with the VC-10, which proved successful in hot and high climates, but failed to penetrate the all-important American market. The success of the 707 led in the 70s to the 737, the most successful jet airliner in history. The Hawker-Siddeley Trident boasted another British innovation, an all-weather, fully automatic landing system, used for the first time here at Heathrow in 1973. But it was the Jumbo which was to have the biggest impact ever on airline passenger travel. The Boeing 747, which first flew in 1969, spawned a new age of intercontinental leisure travel and a new headache for airports. And there were other barriers being broken in the 1960s. The Anglo-French caviar and champagne Concorde will survive amazingly well into the next century. It paved the way for unprecedented European cooperation, which has resulted in the Airbus Consortium and its most advanced aircraft, the long-range twin-engined A330. Europe now competes with America head-to-head in almost every sector of the airliner market. The latest Boeing airliner is the 777. Twin-engine jets now fly enormous distances, cutting even further the cost of intercontinental travel.
Well, no aviation program looking back over the past 50 years would be complete without the Trident. It was a common sight in the 1960s, and the aircraft is fondly remembered by many people, not least the Trident Preservation Society. Over the last couple of years, this group of engineers have lovingly restored this Trident 3B, which last flew in 1985.
It's really been a case of giving up everything at the weekend. I mean, certainly fortunately we're restoring it during the summer months, so we'd be like on the aircraft sort of first thing in the morning and working through until sort of 8, 9 o'clock at night. So you didn't get much time down the pub or anything like that.
So the fly-past aircraft have left Stansted Airport. They're due to arrive behind me here on the north runway in the next few minutes. Now, Heathrow has never staged an air show quite like this before. You can imagine the sorts of preparations that have gone into sorting all of this sort of thing out, especially when you think 1,100 aircraft go in and out of this place every single day. Given the amount of preparation, I should think this is the only fly-past to happen for a while to come yet.
Well, we've been getting tremendously excited here, watching the radar screens and watching the approach of the formation. We can't actually see the first two aircraft. Here we're inside the Rapide, which is leading the formation. We've already seen those, of course, at Stansted there, the cramped cockpit of the Rapide. We can't see their actual idents on the radar, just a blip, and here they are now coming in live over. Well, that's probably just Osterley Park, about a couple of miles or so to run to Heathrow. This is all being conducted in silence, and the radar operators are able to track it with the squawk idents. It shows exactly which aircraft is where. Tremendous sight of all the aircraft. They're all a long way out, and there's the Lancaster coming in at 150 knots, 300 feet above the ground. The City of Lincoln from the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, which has come up from behind, underflying the Rapides, to eventually lead the formation as it crosses the threshold. And there it goes. And the Lancaster represents the BOAC Lancastrian, the aircraft that took off from here 50 years ago on the 28th of May to land 63 hours later in Sydney in Australia. Its maximum range, amazingly, was over 4,000 miles, and on the Australia route carried just 6 passengers, each having a bunk, an armchair and a table. Even so, conditions on board these converted bombers lack the elegance and luxury of the old pre-war flying boats of Imperial Airways. And the two de Havilland Rapides. Like the Lancaster, this robustly designed aircraft flew in both civil and military colours.